Hi, I'm Rusty Dornin with the Kaufman Fellows Academy, and we want to welcome you to the final hangout with Brad Feld. The class isn't over yet, of course, but this is the final hangout we'll have with Brad. We'll be talking about negotiating today, and I just wanted to say it's been an incredible class so far. A lot of you folks have written in comments to talk about how grateful you are that Brad has joined us. So again, Brad, welcome to this last hangout with Venture Deals 3.
My pleasure.
All right, we have a whole load of questions, so I'm just going to get underway because Brad does have a hard out at the top of the hour, so forgive us if we don't get to all your questions. First question up, does a VC usually rely on the founders to deliver an exit, or are they involved in the sale and sales negotiations?
It varies a lot depending on both the VC and the stage of investment that they make, as well as the VC's experience and ability to negotiate. If you've raised money just from angel investors, oftentimes many of the angel investors aren't actively involved in any sort of exit. If one of your angel investors has a lot of experience negotiating deals, getting them involved, if and when you have an exit, is useful. As you raise more money, the more experienced and later stage or larger VCs that invest, I shouldn't say more experienced, but the larger VCs who invest, if they take a board seat, those VCs often will be involved in any sort of exit negotiation. You should be very wary of the VC who thinks she knows everything and is a great negotiator and in fact isn't. This happens quite often. You see it where a VC will assert a whole bunch of stuff around the negotiation dynamic, and then, his approach or his tone is just way off. The other thing to be wary of as an entrepreneur is to recognize that your board should be involved in your negotiation, but you should minimize the number of negotiating points, the number of people who are actually in the negotiation with the buyer. In your optimal case, you have one principal from your board who's representing and helping you in the context of that negotiation. I find a lot of times if the entrepreneur is negotiating with a buyer, you're negotiating with your board and you've got investors who might have different points of view about what to do. All of a sudden you've got a multi-party negotiation going on, when instead you should really be understanding what your board and what your investors want and then trying to negotiate the best outcome with the buyer. So just be wary of it. The last comment I'd make on this is some VCs are extraordinarily effective negotiators, are very, very good at it, have done lots and lots of transactions with the typical buyers of your company. And if you happen to have one of them as an investor, I strongly encourage you to use them to help you with the process.
Why would an angel investor be interested in 20 to 30% stake in a startup and no less?
Because they're not an angel investor. That sounds like somebody who's probably either got very little experience as an angel investor, or it's somebody who's really trying to use the situation inappropriately with the amount of capital that they're putting in to be a co-owner of the business. If the angel investor is investing $1 million in a seed stage company and it's $1 million coming from them, 25% ownership is reasonable. So they're a very big investor at that point. And $1 million angel investor is going to look very different than a $10 or $25 or $50,000 angel investor. I'm assuming you're talking about somebody who's investing much less money than that. If you are dealing with an angel who's investing $1 million by themselves into your fund or into your company, that's great. If you like that angel investor, if you trust them, if they've got a track record of making those kinds of investments. But if it's somebody who's investing $50,000 or $100,000 and asking for that kind of ownership in your company, I would probably run away.
Okay. This one is a two-part question, but different topics. But how should we best time and structure the bidding process? And then he asked, what is your take on telling the VC that the market will determine the valuation?
Market will determine the valuation is a pretty common way of avoiding answering the question, what's the valuation? Most investors will ask you what your valuation expectations are. If you have a clear valuation expectation and you believe you're going to have a deal that has lots of interest in it. There's never anything wrong with exposing that if you just want to cut to the chase with that investor. But it's also equally relevant and appropriate for you to say that the market will determine it. And it's especially true if you don't really know where the valuation should land, or that particular investor is not the one that you necessarily want to land. Managing the process is challenging. Like, the timing of it is hard to get. I mean, you want to get somebody interested. You want to try to keep moving people along at the same time. Your hope is that you're able to get enough interest so that you have the term sheets come in within a relative short time of each other. Certainly, once you start getting term sheets, you can go to your other investors and say that you have term sheets. I think you can also, when you feel like you're within 2 weeks or so of getting term sheets, tell everybody, hey, we're calling for term sheets as of such and such a date. Be thoughtful about how venture firms work. They tend to make decisions on Mondays because of the Monday partner meeting dynamic that is pretty ubiquitous. So, it's hard to ask somebody for a decision, Friday is our deadline, because oftentimes they'll need that Monday, but Tuesday is a deadline or Wednesday is a deadline tends to be a pretty good deadline because that gives you enough time between the Monday meeting to get done. And frankly, it all depends on how aggressively chased after your company is. If you have a company where there's a huge amount of interest, you have a lot of leverage in managing the dynamics of timing. If you're just trying to get one VC over the line with a term sheet, you kind of don't have much of a forcing function other than to try to keep nudging them along.
Okay. Hi, Brad. We have a potential investor that's a corporation in our industry with a VC arm. What should we consider or be worried about when working with a VC that has a direct commercial interest in the technology?
Some strategic investors are great, and some strategic investors are terrible. I just wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal, or an interview that was in VentureWire or something. I don't remember where it was, about corporate investors. I'll try to find it and post it in the class like I did the last time. This is a case where diligence is really worthwhile. There's a huge difference between the corporate investing group of a company like Intel, that's been investing for many, many years and has a predictable set of behaviors. SAP Ventures, which now has spun off their venture group completely. It's called Sapphire Ventures. SAP is still an investor, but they're a separate entity, has a different behavioral characteristics. Qualcomm Ventures, which has been around for a while, different behavioral characteristics. Just understanding what they are. And I would suggest that right now most corporations are getting excited about doing strategic venturing and making investments in startups again. It's become very trendy, but recognize that it comes in and out of favor. All of a sudden, when the markets are hot, every corporation starts investing in startups. When the markets go the other direction, which they inevitably do, they all withdraw and stop investing in startups. So as an entrepreneur, just think hard about what you're getting from that strategic investor. Talk to lots of entrepreneurs they've made strategic investments in, and recognize that very few strategic investors will lead around. Oftentimes a strategic investor will follow. And so you get stuck in this sort of endless dynamic of them expressing interest but then not being able to issue a term sheet and lead.
Okay, for an enterprise company focused on applied machine learning with a couple of paying customers and a pipeline of 10 additional deals, could you recommend an angel round negotiation strategy for funding tech development and consulting/sales staffing?
I don't think you need a strategy. I think you just need to decide how much you want to raise for a period of time. I like to define the amount that you should raise as the least amount of money you need to make progress to the next level of your business. So you get to define all those characteristics. It's not that you need to raise a magic amount, and it's not that there's a magic point of success. You have to decide, if I get to this place, either I have a cash flow positive business or I have a business that I'll be able to raise more money for. And that defines the amount of capital you want. If the amount of capital you want is $500,000, you have a set of types of angels that you would go after. If it's $1 million, it's maybe a little larger set of angels with some people who could write bigger checks. If it's $5 million, you're probably going after VC instead of angel, and you should reevaluate, especially if you're at the very beginning, why you need $5 million to get that next level. What could you do with $500,000 or $1 million?
Convertible note or Series C documents for early stage financing. When does each work best?
Doesn't matter at this point. There's been 10 million words spilled on blogs about which is better. They go in and out of favor. There's been, I think, 9 different Series C document standards proposed, all which are basically the same with tiny nuances. And then there's been recently even some additional types of documents that are not really equity or debt, but are some sort of hybrid, all that convert into equity when there's a qualified round. You're basically dealing with a situation where, to some degree, if the company's successful, the debt's going to convert into equity pretty early, and the terms are going to be defined by the convertible note terms, whether there's a cap and a discount. If the company's not successful, it doesn't matter. Everybody's going to lose their money, whether it's equity or debt. So, to some degree, it's what your investors want to do. I think there's optimization on the entrepreneur's part. There's definitely some cases where entrepreneurs try to optimize with a convertible note that's uncapped and doesn't have a discount. I mean, that's basically asking somebody to prepay money for your next equity round. And, that's kind of a shitty thing to do to an early investor. If that early investor is investing in you, giving them some credit for taking a chance early is something that, at least from my perspective, granted I'm an investor now, but when I was an entrepreneur, I always wanted my early investors to feel good about their investment and feel like they had gotten something for getting in very early. But to some degree, the investors that you're talking to will determine it. It used to be the case that notes were a lot easier to document and paper and implement than equity agreements. Not really that true anymore. They're both pretty straightforward.
Okay, what are strategies to negotiate for some equity in a startup, part of a percentage, in exchange for services like providing a new sales channel that will drive significant revenue?
So that sounds like you're the person asking that question. You're approaching a startup and saying, look, you don't have to pay me money, but I want to get some equity in exchange for some services as a consultant. I think just being direct about what you're doing, I mean, obviously the company needs to have the need for what you're doing as a consultant, but let's assume that the company has the need for it. In the scenario where the company has the need for it, structurally, it's probably best if they gave you stock options, and as a consultant, you'd be getting non-qualified stock options, so you have to understand non-quals versus ISOs and how the tax works on it. They could give you stock, but the problem with stock is that you'll have to pay tax on the stock when you get it, and so they'll essentially be giving you something that's illiquid, and then you'll have to turn around and pay tax. So the best mechanism if you want to get equity in a company for doing services like that is to get what are called non-qualified stock options.
You talk about all that stuff that's needed when being acquired. Do you have a list of corporate records and other things that should be prepared?
I don't have a list that I can easily point to on the web. They probably exist at any of the major law firm websites that have document resources, whether it's Cooley or Wilson Sonsini. If you have one of those firms as a lawyer and you're in an M&A process, they will generally send you a list of all the diligence items that you would expect. The buyer, if you're dealing with a buyer, will always send you a list of diligence items. They tend to be very, very comprehensive as part of the process. So any M&A process generally has a lot of paper wrangling as part of the process to get to close. Much of it, which feels completely spurious, but is under the aegis of due diligence.
What's the #1 metric you want to know in a pitch? I.e., if you only had one question to ask the entrepreneur, what's that going to be?
I don't think that I have a question. I think that the reason I don't have a question is many of the companies that I engage with, I'm not looking to be Mr. Socrates and sit on the receiving end of a bunch of questions. I'm actually trying to understand the entrepreneur, understand the product, understand what's going on, but through my engagement with the entrepreneur and the product. So it doesn't really reduce to a single question. I would tell you that my evaluation criteria is very focused, which is first, I want to understand what the product is and whether or not I care about the product. If I have no affinity for the product, then I'm not interested in being an investor. And second, I'm very focused on how obsessed the entrepreneur is about his or her product. Not how passionate they are, not how excited they are, but how obsessed they are. And that ends up being the driver for me.
Okay. How does a typical negotiation run? First meeting, how long does it last? Is it always in person?
Oh, it varies all over the place. I've had negotiations where I've never met the person on the other end of the negotiation. I've had negotiations where, at the end of sitting in a room for several hours, I wanted to kill everybody in the room. I don't think there's a standard for it. I have done deals where I've never physically met the person before the deal got done, whether it was an investment or an acquisition, or in some cases even a sale where I was part of the sale process, but I never met the principal on the other side face to face. And then I've had numerous, the other end of the spectrum, just long drawn out, lots and lots of time spent before you get there. It just varies.
You were saying you had some where you didn't meet them face to face. You talked to them on the phone. Did you do a Google chat, or how did you get a sense of them?
Yeah, I mean, lots of a number of relationships have developed over time without any physical interaction. So, email, phone calls, and video conference.
Okay.
And I can't think of a case where I made an investment where I didn't at least have a video conference. So you physically see each other, but there's a huge difference still between a video conference and sitting down and having a meal together.
What do you think about MFN clause in convertible notes?
I'm kind of indifferent. It's becoming trendy all of a sudden. I think 500 startups may have introduced it as a standard in their notes, and you're starting to see it in other notes. The thing that happens is that if you have a convertible note and you have the entrepreneur takes a convertible note and then gets an equity deal, and for some reason the equity deal has something that's misaligned with the convertible note. I would say a good entrepreneur that respects his or her early investors will think hard about just modifying the convertible note to conform to the equity round anyway. I think that there are some entrepreneurs who don't do that and over-optimize. Oh, I got better terms from the note guys. Now I'm doing this equity round on a specific set of terms that are not quite as good, but that's okay because the note guys didn't get it. And I think that's where it comes from is early-stage investors feeling like they're getting optimized by either the entrepreneur or by the next round investors. I've done a lot of investments using a convertible note as an angel investor or as a seed investor. And I don't really care about an MFN clause personally. I think that the behavior of the entrepreneur in those situations tells me a lot about the entrepreneur, and most of the time, that knowledge, how you get treated in that situation, is a function of the quality of the entrepreneur. I think the better entrepreneurs are more thoughtful about how they treat the early investors versus let me just maximize every little bit I can get.
Should a startup set the initial valuation based on the amount it wants to raise?
Absolutely not. You should set your valuation based on what you think the clearing price of your company is. Recognize that if you're a seed stage investor, most seed rounds end up being $250,000 to $1 million, and people end up buying between 10 and 33% of the company. So you can do the math of where the valuation ranges are, but they tend to be on certainly for tech businesses, it tends to be a pre-money valuation of between $2 million and $5 million. But it's a pretty broad range, and the idea that you're setting it based on, well, we're raising $500,000, therefore, this is the valuation is the backwards way of doing it.
Have you ever taken board seats or did mentoring to a startup if you have not invested with Foundry Group or privately?
Never with Foundry Group. We only take board seats on companies that we've invested in. Personally, I don't think so. I may have, when I made angel investments between 94 and 96, I may have done a few cases of those, but even in those cases, I generally would get stock options and exercise my stock options right away. And I think there may have been a few cases where I joined a board and then had an opportunity to buy somebody else's shares or invest afterwards. So I'm not a big fan personally of joining a board without putting some money in a company as a board member. That said, when we bring in outside board members into companies, especially mid-stage or later stage after they've raised money from us as a venture firm, we don't require the board members to put money in the companies to be on the board, especially as outside board members. But if somebody said, hey, I want to put $500,000 into this company now that I've joined the board, we'd figure out how to make that happen.
If the VC gives me the valuation I seek, should I guarantee the VC a lead position in the deal? Do you personally like it if giving the right to bid last?
I don't know that I understand the second question.
Yeah, I didn't either.
The right to bid last, I don't think makes any sense. Like saying somebody, I'm gonna always give you the chance to bid last on this. I'll always come to you before I sign a deal. It seems, I mean, it's a tactic that some people ask for. It seems like kind of an arbitrary tactic. From the entrepreneur's perspective, it seems to limit your ability to get them to put forward their best deal, because they're always going to be waiting to see what the best deal is and then beat it by a penny. Right of first refusal, right of first offer, right of last refusal, those sorts of things I try to avoid as an investor, and I encourage entrepreneurs to try to avoid. I think they mess up the whole negotiating dynamic. The lead position thing, personally, I don't think being the lead investor matters that much. We're in plenty of situations where we invest $1 million and somebody else invests $1 million in something, and they say the other firm says we really want to be the lead investor on this deal, and for Foundry Group, we're like, yeah, whatever, we don't care. The entrepreneur sometimes wants us to be co-lead investors. Okay, whatever. The idea of letting somebody be the lead, really what you're doing is you're negotiating terms, and if somebody's driving the term negotiation and there's one firm that's specifically driving the term negotiation, almost by definition they're the lead investor. But it doesn't mean that you can't have co-leads or 2 lead investors, or even in some cases 3 lead investors that are all co-leads.
This is relevant just because I'm in Ireland right now at the summit, and you and I were discussing about the venture funding outlook in Europe and that sort of thing. This question is, would you invest in a company that is located in another country? How to deal with distance differences in culture, regulations, etc.?
We don't at Foundry Group. One of our strategies is only invest in companies in the U.S. In the late 90s, early 2000s, I invested in 7 companies internationally, 1 in Southeast Asia and 6 in Europe, and I'm 0.5 for 7. So in 6 of the 7 companies I got zeros, literally got 0 back, and one of the companies I got half my money back. And even the one that I got half my money back was kind of a weird situation where I think I got lucky that I got half my money back. I probably should, based on the deal dynamics and the relationships, would have gotten 0. So I just believe I suck at investing internationally. And so I don't do it. It also, part of sucking at it was a function of culture in the different countries, and understanding the dynamics of international business, and understanding the dynamics of business in those different countries that we were investing in. Some of it was geography, some of it was distance, some of it was time zones. But I think most of it, when I look at it, was, as a firm, for us, for Foundry Group, we've defined a very clear set of strategies, and we're investing in areas that we think we're really good at. And we make lots and lots of mistakes. We have lots of things fail and not work, but we try to stay very, very focused on those areas that we're very good at. And we realized we weren't good at investing internationally, so we don't.
What 3 industries are you particularly excited about right now?
I think that in 20 years, our relationship with computers will be radically different than it is today. So I'm very interested in companies and technologies that change the way we interact with computers in substantive and dramatic ways. And that ranges from physical stuff like our investment in Fitbit or our investment in Sphero to very, very broad platform companies like Urban Airship that power a huge amount of push notifications across the internet. So I'd say the two areas that I'm most intrigued with in our portfolio and our themes are what we call human-computer interaction, or the changing way that computers and humans interact with each other, and then this layer we call glue, which in the 1980s might have been called middleware, but it allows essentially machines to communicate with other machines and sort of software working at that layer.
Okay, last two questions here. Another question not related to negotiations. Which materials does Foundry Group want to see if entrepreneur gets an intro, teaser deck, executive summary, two-pager, etc.?
Optimally 3 paragraphs so I can read them really quickly and tell you whether it's something we're interested in or not. I have a blog post called Saying No in 60 Seconds, which I'll put up. We get a ridiculous amount of inbound on a daily basis, and my goal is to say no right away because I don't want to waste your time as an entrepreneur for something that we're not going to invest in. And I can almost always figure that out from a couple of paragraphs. I'm also happy to get a deck and just skim through a deck really quickly. Either of those two things is fine. And if you've ever emailed me something, I hope I've been responsive. I try to respond to everything that comes inbound. But an awful lot of times you'll get a short message saying, hey, this is neat, but not our kind of thing. I actually find the person who hasn't done research on what we invest in, then spending lots of time trying to convince us why it's great and why it should be our thing, they're wasting their time. And as an entrepreneur, recognize that doing research on, I think we talked about this in one of the previous talks, doing research on the investors you're going after and making sure you're targeting folks that are relevant to you is pretty important.
If you could do a real quick answer on this one, because there is one wrap-up one, but what's more important, having control or keeping more equity, if you had a choice between the two?
From the entrepreneur's perspective or investors?
Yeah. If the entrepreneur needs to make a choice between the two.
Having control or keeping more equity, it's a false choice. Once you take outside investors, you probably don't have the level of control you think you have, especially if you have venture investors. It's a phenomenal book that whoever wrote the question should read. I'll post it up there as well. It's by a guy named Noam Wasserman, who's a Harvard Business School professor, called Rich or King. It's called The Founder's Dilemmas, but he talks about being rich or being king. I also talk about it in my Startup Boards book. But Noam's book talks about all the issues between the trade-offs of control, ownership, dynamics between founders and investors. And again, for whoever asked that question, I think he'll answer it in a book well better than I'm going to answer it in 10 seconds.
Final just wrap up. Someone just said, thank you for all the great input into this course. What is it that you wanted to get out of it, and is there anything we can do for you to make it even better for you?
Oh, well, thanks. Appreciate the offer back. The reason we did this course in some ways is the same reason we did venture deals, and the reason that I've been writing so many of the books that I've written over the last couple of years around entrepreneurship and trying to demystify lots of different parts of entrepreneurship. I think more information is better. I think that helping arm entrepreneurs with as much as they can have to be more successful is good. When I first started my company in 1987, I had virtually no information. People didn't even use the word entrepreneurship, and it was kind of like tribal lore that you figured it out. So my motivation, I think, is in the sort of range of intrinsic around teaching and spreading the word and helping people learn more themselves as they go on the journey of entrepreneurship. Things you can do to help me, the stuff that you see in my world that I do that is positive, spread it. Tell people that it's good, and introduce your friends to the books and to the blogs and to whatever you find useful that I've produced. If you find stuff that I've produced garbage, with which I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that I've done that is crap, feel free to give me constructive feedback on that too. I'm always happy to get notes of, hey Brad, I appreciated what you did here, but this didn't feel like it was very helpful, or I don't understand this, or I'm having trouble figuring that out. And then the last comment is just go forth and do really powerful things with your business, and recognize that a deep part of my own personal philosophy is this idea of give before you get. I have a book coming out next year from FG Press called Give First. It's part of the motto of Techstars, which is the idea that you give before you get. You put energy into a system without necessarily knowing what you get back. And I'd encourage everybody here to participate that way in many of the endeavors you're involved in.
Hey, Brad, thank you so much. I know you've got a call coming in. Again, folks can still ask questions. This was our last hangout with Brad. Next week, we're going to have your partner, Jason Mendelson, talking about getting acquired. Again, thanks for everything, Brad.
Enjoy Jason. Y'all have fun with him. See y'all later.